Today I'm going to show you how to set up the gauge system on a Diablosport Trinity using a 2011 Mustang. Setup is the same for other vehicles, but the parameters that you can monitor will vary by vehicle. Start by selecting Logging, create a new log, and either start the engine or key it on. Then select an empty layout, touch the runtime gauge, and select Remove to get rid of it. Now touch Edit and add a new gauge. Select Small Digital Gauge and scroll to the parameter group that you want to log from. In this case, that's fuel. Then scroll to the parameter you want the gauge to display, such as Lambda equivalent Bank 1. This PID represents the wideband O2 sensor reading from Bank 1. Continue adding gauges, which are placed on screen in a counterclockwise fashion, starting with the top left. Plan your layout in advance to avoid having to move things around too much at the end. In this case, I want my two wideband readings side by side, so I'll add engine coolant temperature as the second gauge and wideband Bank 2 as the third gauge. Besides offering dual wideband gauges, the 2011 and up Mustang will show you knock retard, which you will find under the misfire parameter group. When you fill up a screen, touch Edit and add a new gauge page to create a second page for additional gauges. Using additional pages allows you to effectively monitor as many parameters as you want. Here, I'm using my second page for temperature readings, including the cylinder head temperature and air charge temperature. I also like to include the total timing advance and system voltage on this page. I create a third page for vehicle performance readings, such as the engine RPM and vehicle speed. Try to avoid monitoring either an excessive number of parameters or parameters that are not relevant to the daily operation of the vehicle, as this can result in a cluttered and unusable gauge system. If you add a gauge and it's not placed exactly where you want it, simply touch the gauge and select Move the Gauge. Then use the directional buttons to move it to your desired location. Once there, press the center button on the direction pad to place it. Once you've placed all your gauges, you can configure them. For instance, touch the RPM gauge and select Set Shift Light. Then select Change on the next screen and close the hint. Use the on-screen controls to select the RPM at which to turn the shift light on. In this case, I'm setting the shift light to 6,800 RPM. Once your set point is reached, touch Enter, then confirm the setting. You can choose 3 ways for the LEDs to be used for the shift light, including using a single LED, flashing all of the LEDs at the shift point, or a progressive shift, which turns the LEDs on in sequence. I prefer progressive. In most cases, you will also select No to X-Puck reduction. In many cases, you can change the units that are displayed for a gauge. Touch the engine coolant temperature gauge and select Change Display Units to change the readout from Celsius to Fahrenheit. You may also want to change the wideband O2 display to read the air-fuel ratio instead of the less commonly used lambda. Once you have the gauges set up the way you like them, start the car and touch Record. You can either record a log for later review or just watch your new gauges in action. The up and down buttons on the direction pad allow you to switch between the pages that you just defined. Touching Stop will stop the log data. Then, touching X will prompt you to save your layout. If you're happy with it, say yes and give it a name. You can use the directional pad or just touch the screen directly to enter your gauge layout name. And if you want to include numbers, touch the numbers control to switch to numeric entry. Touch OK when you're done and the layout is saved. Although logging must be entered manually each time, the Trinity offers a monitor mode that you can use to start viewing any saved gauge layout when the car is started. From the main menu, select Monitoring. Key on or start the engine, then select your new gauge layout from the list. Monitoring will start immediately. You can cycle through the gauge pages to see all of your gauges. Since we set up the shift light, revving the car up to the shift point lights the LEDs. You can shut the car off and the Trinity will automatically go into a screensaver mode. Then, when you restart the car, Trinity will wake up and resume monitoring until you manually exit the monitor mode.